The night Damien Volkov walked into the Marrow estate and shattered my sister's engagement, I was hiding behind a marble column, wishing I could disappear into the wallpaper. I'd spent 26 years being invisible, the forgettable daughter, the shadow no one bothered to notice. Then his eyes found mine across that crowded room, and everything I thought I knew about safety, silence, and surviving my own family turned to ash. Because the most dangerous man in the city didn't want my perfect sister anymore. He wanted me. And I was terrified enough to say yes. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoy this story, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Elise's story travels. Now, let's begin. The Marrow family dining room smelled like money and disappointment. I sat at the far end of the table, fork pushing roasted vegetables around my plate, in careful, silent circles, trying to make myself smaller than I already was. It was a skill I'd perfected over 26 years, the art of occupying space without actually taking up any. My mother sat rigid in her chair, her posture a testament to 4 generations of finishing school. My father checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. And Vivian, beautiful, radiant, insufferable Vivian, held court at the center of it all, her laughter like champagne bubbles, expensive and effervescent. The venue confirmed Saturdays in June, she announced, touching her engagement ring with the kind of casual reverence reserved for religious artifacts. The diamond caught the chandelier light and threw rainbows across the ceiling. I looked away. Damien wants the reception at the plaza. Can you imagine? The plaza. Mother's smile was tight. How appropriate. I knew that smile. It was the same one she wore when the country club ladies complimented her daughters. Plural, technically, though she only ever meant one. Vivian was the success story. I was the footnote she wished she could edit out. Elise, darling, you're awfully quiet, Vivian said, her voice dripping with concern that fooled absolutely no one. Are you feeling well? I met her eyes for half a second before looking down. I'm fine. You're always fine, she laughed, turning back to Mother. Anyway, I told Damien's assistant that we'd need at least 400 seats. The front door opened with enough force to rattle the windows. My father stood, his napkin falling forgotten to the floor. What the hell? Footsteps echoed through the foyer, heavy, deliberate. The kind of walk that belonged to someone who'd never been told no in his life and wouldn't recognize the word if he heard it. Then Damien Volkov appeared in the doorway, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He was alone. No bodyguards, no assistant, no warning. Just 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that would have been beautiful if it weren't so cold. I'd met him exactly 3 times. Each time, I'd done my best impression of furniture. Vivian rose with practiced grace, her smile wide and perfect. Damien, we weren't expecting you until... Sit down, Vivian. His voice cut through her sentence like a blade through silk. She sat. I'd never seen her follow an order that quickly in my entire life. My father cleared his throat. Mr. Volkov, this is highly irregular. The engagement is off. The words landed like a grenade in the middle of the table. Vivian's face went white. What? You heard me. Damien's expression didn't change. He could have been commenting on the weather. My lawyers will handle the financial arrangements. You'll keep the ring. Consider it compensation for your time. Compensation? Vivian's voice climbed an octave. Damien, if this is about the prenup negotiations, it's not about the prenup. It's not about anything you did or didn't do. He paused, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, his gaze shifted. Found me. Held. It's about what I want, and I don't want you. My mother gasped. My father started to stand. Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. And me? I wanted to sink through the floor and disappear into the foundation. This is outrageous, my father sputtered. You can't simply... I can. Damien's attention hadn't left me. Elise, I need to speak with you, privately. The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against my plate. Everyone turned to stare at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings. Elise? Vivian's voice was shrill. What does she have to do with anything? Everything, Damien said simply. Elise, please. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what was happening because it made absolutely no sense. Men like Damian Volkov didn't notice girls like me. We existed in different universes, separated by wealth and confidence and the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet. No. My mother's voice cracked like a whip. Absolutely not. Elise, you stay right where you are. But Damien was already moving toward me, his hand extended. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I looked at his hand, broad palm, long fingers, a scar across his knuckles that looked old and earned, and something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped, like a rubber band pulled too tight for too long. I stood. Elise! Vivian's shriek could have shattered crystal. You can't be serious. I took Damien's hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and solid, and he led me out of the dining room while my family erupted into chaos behind us. I heard my mother shouting, my father threatening legal action, Vivian sobbing with the kind of dramatic flair she usually reserved for charity galas. None of it mattered, because for the first time in my life, I was walking away instead of disappearing. Damien took me to my father's study, a room I'd been inside maybe twice in my entire life. He closed the door, blocking out the noise, and suddenly we were alone in the kind of silence that made my skin feel too tight. Sit, he said. I sat on the leather sofa, my hands twisted in my lap, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, backlit by the evening sun, and I couldn't read his expression. Couldn't tell if he was angry or amused or something else entirely. How long have you known? I asked quietly. Known what? That you were going to do this. End things with Vivian. He turned to face me fully. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh if I weren't so terrified. And you waited until tonight because I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That you were the one I thought you were. I blinked. I don't understand. Damien crossed the room and sat in the chair across from me, close enough that I could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked tired, human. It was unsettling. Do you remember the museum fundraiser last month? He asked. I frowned. Vaguely. Your sister spent the entire evening working the room, smiling, laughing, touching arms and making promises she had no intention of keeping. His mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. You spent the entire evening in the East Wing, talking to a security guard about Baroque painting techniques. My face went hot. You were watching me? I was trying not to, he admitted, but you were the only real person in the building. Real. Everyone else was performing, playing a role. You were just there, passionate about something that had nothing to do with money or status or what anyone thought of you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you know how rare that is in my world, Elise? I shook my head mutely. It's not. It's non-existent. He paused. I've built an empire on reading people, knowing what they want, what they fear, how to use both against them. Your sister is easy. She wants power, attention, a last name that opens doors. I could have given her that, but I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what was real and what was strategy. And you think I'm different? The words came out sharper than I intended. You don't know me. You've spoken to me maybe 5 times. 6, he corrected. And you're right. I don't know you. But I know you're not Vivian. You're not your mother. You don't smile when you don't mean it, and you don't pretend to care about things that bore you. His eyes held mine. You're honest, even when it costs you. I wanted to argue, tell him he was wrong, that I was just as fake as everyone else, that I'd spent my whole life pretending to be smaller and quieter and less than I was just to survive my own family. But the words stuck in my throat. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because I have a proposition for you. Of course he did. Men like Damian Volkov didn't do anything without a reason. I'm listening. He stood, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, set it on the coffee table between us. A contract, 2 years. You become my wife in name and public appearance. In exchange, you receive financial independence, a separate residence if you prefer, and complete autonomy over your own life. No expectations beyond the occasional public event. No pressure, no performance. I stared at the papers like they might bite me. You want me to marry you? I want a partnership built on transparency instead of manipulation, and I think you want out of this house badly enough to consider it. He wasn't wrong. I hated that he wasn't wrong. What happens after 2 years, I asked. Clean divorce, a generous settlement. You walk away with enough money to build whatever life you want. He tilted his head. Or we renegotiate. Depends on how well we work together. And if I say no, then I apologize for wasting your time and you go back to your life. He paused. But I don't think you want to go back, Elise. I think you're suffocating here. I think you've been invisible for so long that you've started to believe that's all you'll ever be. The words hit like a fist to the sternum. You don't know anything about me, I said again, but my voice shook. Then prove me wrong. Tell me you're happy. Tell me you love your life, your family, the way they treat you like an afterthought. His expression didn't change. Tell me you don't lie awake at night wishing you were brave enough to leave. I couldn't, because he was right about all of it. This is insane, I whispered. Probably. I don't love you. I don't love you either. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Survival, he said simply. I need someone I can trust not to destroy me for profit. You need someone who will give you the space to figure out who you are without your family's expectations crushing you. He picked up the contract and held it out. Read it. Think about it. You have 24 hours to decide. I took the papers with trembling hands. They were warm from being in his pocket. One more thing, Damien added, moving toward the door. If you say yes, your family will hate you. They'll cut you off, spread rumors, make your life hell for as long as they can. You need to be prepared for that. They already don't notice me, I said quietly. I'm not sure hate would be worse. He stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me, really looked at me. Like I was something worth seeing. You're wrong, he said. You're very noticeable, Elise. You've just been surrounded by people who benefit from you believing otherwise. Then he left. I sat alone in my father's study, holding a contract that would either save me or destroy me. And for the first time in my life, I had a choice that was entirely my own. I didn't sleep that night. I read the contract 17 times. It was surprisingly straightforward. No hidden clauses, no traps, nothing that screamed red flag beyond the sheer audacity of the entire arrangement. Separate bedrooms, separate finances during the marriage, combined public appearances for business purposes, a clause about fidelity that was clinical in its precision, and the settlement terms that would leave me with more money than I'd ever imagined having. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. Vivian. How could you? Then another. You knew. You've always known. And another. You're pathetic. He'll destroy you. I turned my phone off and went back to reading. At dawn, I made coffee in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes. My mother found me there, her robe pulled tight, her face a mask of disappointment I'd seen 1,000 times before. I assume you're going to refuse his ridiculous offer, she said without preamble. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. I didn't add sugar. I haven't decided. Elise, she said my name like it tasted bad. You cannot possibly be considering this. That man is dangerous. He's using you to humiliate your sister, to humiliate this family. Maybe I want to be used for something, I interrupted. Better than being ignored. Her face flushed. Don't be dramatic. You've always been overly sensitive. I'm not being sensitive. I'm being honest. I set down my mug. When was the last time you asked me how I was? Really asked, not just as a formality before you moved on to talking about Vivian? That's not fair. When was the last time Dad remembered my birthday without Vivian reminding him? When was the last time either of you cared about anything I wanted? My voice stayed level. Quiet. But the words were sharp enough to draw blood. I could disappear tomorrow, and it would take you a week to notice. How dare you? I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I'm just tired of pretending it doesn't hurt me. She stared at me like I'd sprouted a second head. Then she straightened her shoulders, pulled her robe tighter, and delivered the final blow with surgical precision. If you do this, if you marry that man, you are no longer welcome in this house. Do you understand? You will not be part of this family. I looked at her, really looked at her, Saw the woman who'd given birth to me and then spent 26 years wishing she hadn't. The woman who'd chosen a favorite daughter before either of us could walk and never once questioned that choice. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay? Okay, I understand. I picked up my coffee and walked past her toward the stairs. I'll be out by tonight. Elise. I didn't turn around, didn't stop, just kept walking. I called Damien at 9 a.m. from my bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the remnants of a life I'd never really wanted. I need to know something first, I said when he answered. Anything. Are you a good man? Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, no. I'm not a good man, Elise. I've done things that would keep you awake at night. I've hurt people, ruined them. Sometimes because I had to, sometimes because I wanted to. He paused. But I keep my word, and I won't hurt you. That's the best I can offer. It should have terrified me. It probably should have sent me running. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to me in years. Okay, I said. Okay? My answer is yes. Another pause. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. I looked around my childhood bedroom. The pale yellow walls I'd never chosen, the bookshelf full of classics I'd read to escape, the window that looked out over a garden I wasn't allowed to touch. When do we start? I'll send a car in 2 hours. Pack what matters. Leave the rest. That's it? That's it. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. Welcome to your new life, Elise. He hung up. I sat on my bed, phone in hand, and waited for the panic to hit. For second thoughts. For the sensible voice in my head to start screaming. It never came. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. I felt free. The black car arrived exactly 2 hours later. The driver helped me with my boxes. There were only 3, and didn't ask questions when I took one last look at the house, and didn't cry. Vivian watched from her bedroom window. I saw the curtain move. Saw her silhouette. I didn't wave. My mother didn't come outside. My father was already at the office, oblivious as always. The house stood silent and perfect and empty, just like it had always been. The driver opened the car door. I slid inside. Damien was waiting. Everything you need? He asked, glancing at my meager boxes in the trunk. Everything that matters, I corrected. He nodded slowly, something unreadable crossing his face. The apartment is ready. You'll have your own space, your own key. We'll handle the legal paperwork tomorrow, and the announcement goes out by Friday. That fast? No point dragging it out. The longer we wait, the more time people have to interfere. He met my eyes. Having second thoughts? I should have said yes. Should have asked him to turn the car around. Instead, I said third and fourth thoughts. But I'm still here. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. Good, because this is going to get ugly before it gets better. How ugly? Your family will disown you publicly. The press will call you a homewrecker, a social climber, a dozen other things that aren't true. My enemies will try to use you against me. He paused. And through all of it, you're going to have to stand next to me and pretend you chose this because you wanted to, not because you were desperate. I did choose this, I said quietly. Maybe I am desperate, but it's still my choice. Something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or surprise. Then let's go home, he said. Home. The word felt foreign, dangerous, like something I didn't deserve. But as the car pulled away from the Marrow estate and the only life I'd ever known disappeared in the rearview mirror, I realized I didn't care what I deserved anymore. I cared about what I wanted. And for the first time in 26 years, I wanted something for myself, even if it terrified me, even if it destroyed me, even if it was the biggest mistake I'd ever make. I wanted this. The apartment was in Midtown, 20th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a kingdom. Hardwood floors, modern furniture, a kitchen bigger than my childhood bedroom. It was beautiful, sterile, the kind of place that belonged in magazines, not real life. Your room is down the hall, Damien said, setting my boxes on the dining table. Bathroom's attached. There's a study if you want to work. Kitchen's fully stocked. But we have a housekeeper who comes Mondays and Thursdays if you'd prefer not to cook. I nodded, taking it all in. Where's your room? Other side of the apartment. He gestured vaguely. You won't see me unless you want to. I travel a lot for business. When I'm here, I keep odd hours. So we're roommates. More or less. He loosened his tie. Look, I know this is strange. I know it's not what you imagined for your life. But I meant what I said. You have complete autonomy. This is your space as much as mine. Okay? I wrapped my arms around myself. What now? Now you settle in, unpack, rest. We'll deal with the legal details tomorrow. He started to leave, then stopped, turned back. Elise? Yeah? Thank you. He said it simply, sincerely. For saying yes, for trusting me when you had no reason to. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. He left me alone in my beautiful, empty, new life. I unpacked slowly. My books, my journals, the photograph of my grandmother, the only family member who'd ever really seen me. I set her picture on the nightstand and whispered an apology she couldn't hear. Then I stood at the window and looked out at the city glittering below, full of strangers living their own complicated lives, and I wondered what the hell I'd just done. My phone buzzed. Another message from Vivian. You'll regret this. He'll ruin you. I deleted it without responding. Then I turned off my phone, crawled into bed, and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar windows, and I had 24 hours until I became Damian Volkov's wife. The shy girl no one ever noticed was about to become the most talked about woman in the city, and I had absolutely no idea if I was brave enough to survive it. The marriage license office smelled like stale coffee and bureaucracy. Elise sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time she shifted her weight, watching Damian fill out forms with the same clinical efficiency he probably used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts. His handwriting was surprisingly terrible, all sharp angles and impatient slashes. Middle name? He asked without looking up. Catherine. Yours? Alexander. He paused. My mother was Russian, traditional. It was the first personal thing he'd ever told her. Elise filed it away like a museum artifact, something small and precious to be examined later. The clerk called them forward 20 minutes later, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She glanced at their paperwork, then at them, then back at the paperwork. You're Damian Volkov, she said flatly. Yes. The Damian Volkov, from the newspapers. That's correct. The clerk's eyes shifted to Elise, taking in her simple dress, her nervous hands, the fact that she looked nothing like the glamorous socialite she'd seen in last week's engagement announcement. And you're marrying him. It wasn't a question, but Elise nodded anyway. Voluntarily? Damian's jaw tightened. Is there a problem? Just making sure. The clerk stamped their papers with unnecessary force. Congratulations, you're legally married. Next. That was it. 23 minutes in a government office, and Elise Marrow became Elise Volkov. No ceremony, no witnesses, no moment of hesitation where someone could object. They walked out into morning sunlight that felt too bright, too normal for what had just happened. Well, Damian said, pulling out his phone. That's done. Elise stared at the marriage certificate in her hands, her new name printed in official typeface. It didn't feel real. What now? Now I make the announcement, and you prepare for the fallout. He scrolled through messages, his expression unreadable. My PR team drafted a statement. Simple, straightforward, no apologies. Can I see it? He handed her his phone. The statement was exactly what he'd promised. Clinical, brief, designed to give the press nothing to work with. Damian Volkov and Elise Marrow were married in a private ceremony this morning. The couple requests privacy during this time. No further comments will be made. It doesn't mention Vivian, Elise said quietly. No point giving them ammunition. He took the phone back. The story will write itself regardless of what we say. Better to control what we can. When are you sending it? Already did. Her stomach dropped. What? 5 minutes ago. It'll hit the major outlets within the hour. He pocketed his phone and looked at her directly. Last chance to back out. We can get an annulment, say it was a mistake. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. I'm not backing out. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or relief. Then let's go home. You're going to want to turn your phone off for a few days. He wasn't wrong. By the time they reached the apartment, Elise's phone was vibrating so continuously it sounded like a swarm of bees. She powered it down without looking at the messages and dropped it in a drawer. Damien disappeared into his office with a curt nod, leaving her alone in the cavernous living room. Married. She was married. To a man she barely knew. A man who'd walked into her life 4 days ago and blown it apart. Elise sat on the pristine white sofa and waited to feel something other than numb. The numbness lasted until 3 in the afternoon, when someone buzzed from the lobby. Mrs. Volkov, the doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. There's a woman here claiming to be your mother. She's quite insistent. Elise's hand froze on the button. Tell her I'm not available. She says if you don't come down, she'll wait in the lobby indefinitely. Of course she would. Catherine Marrow didn't accept no as an answer. It was one of her most defining traits. Elise grabbed her keys and rode the elevator down, her heart hammering against her ribs. The lobby was all marble and gold fixtures designed to intimidate. Her mother stood at the center of it like she owned the building, her Chanel suit immaculate, her expression carved from ice. Elise. Mother. They faced each other across 20 feet of polished floor, 2 women who shared DNA and nothing else. I assume you've seen the news, Catherine said. I am the news. Her mother's mouth thinned. This is madness, complete madness. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Your father can't show his face at the club. Vivian is devastated. The Ashfords canceled their dinner invitation. I don't care about the Ashfords. Of course you don't care. You've never cared about anything but yourself. Catherine's voice rose, echoing off marble. You've humiliated us. Thrown away every advantage you were born with for what? A man who'll discard you the moment someone more interesting comes along? Elise felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. She'd been broken for years. This was different. This was the sound of something settling into place. You're right, she said calmly. I don't care about the family reputation. I don't care about the club or the Ashfords or what anyone thinks. And you know what's funny? I didn't realize how much I didn't care until I left. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not being ridiculous. I'm being honest for the first time in my life. Elise took a step forward. You want to know why I married Damien? Not because I love him. Not because he's rich or powerful or any of the things Vivian wanted. I married him because he was the first person who ever looked at me and saw something worth noticing. Catherine's face went pale. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is spending 26 years being invisible to my own mother. Elise's voice didn't shake, didn't waver. What's not fair is having a sister who got everything while I got nothing. What's not fair is being told I'm too sensitive when I'm just asking to be seen. We gave you everything. You gave me a roof and food and an education. You never gave me what I actually needed. Elise felt tears building but refused to let them fall. And now you're here because you're embarrassed, not because you care about me. You want me to fix this so your life can go back to normal. Catherine opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in Elise's memory, her mother had nothing to say. I can't fix this, Elise continued, and I don't want to. I'm married now. That's done. You can either accept it or you can leave, but I'm not apologizing. Then you're no daughter of mine. The words should have hurt, should have felt like a knife between the ribs. Instead, Elise just felt tired. Okay, she said quietly. Then I'm not your daughter. She turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving her mother standing alone in the lobby. The doors closed on Catherine Marrow's shocked face, and Elise rode up 20 floors in silence. When she got back to the apartment, Damien was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up as she entered, took in her face, and wordlessly poured a second cup. Rough? He asked. My mother disowned me. I'm sorry. I'm not. She accepted the coffee, wrapped her hands around the warm mug. That probably makes me a terrible person. It makes you honest. He leaned against the counter, studying her. You okay? I don't know. She took a sip. The coffee was perfect, strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. Ask me in a week. Fair enough. He set down his mug. I have a business dinner tonight. You don't have to come if you're not ready. I'll come. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? No, but hiding won't make this easier. She met his eyes. What's the dress code? Formal, intimidating. Think armor disguised as evening wear. Despite everything, Elise almost smiled. I can manage that. The dinner was at Maria, the kind of restaurant where reservations required acts of divine intervention and the wine list had 3 digits. Elise wore a black dress she'd bought that afternoon in a panic, simple enough not to draw attention, but expensive enough that she wouldn't embarrass Damien. Her hands shook as she clasped her grandmother's pearls around her neck. Damien appeared in her doorway wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car had. He looked dangerous, powerful, like exactly the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. Ready? He asked. Not even a little bit. Good. Honesty is more useful than confidence. He offered his arm. Remember, you don't owe anyone explanations. Not tonight, not ever. The restaurant was everything she'd feared. Chandeliers dripping crystal, tables full of Manhattan's elite, all watching them enter with barely concealed fascination. Elise felt every eye in the room track their movement to the private dining area in the back. 6 people were already seated. 3 men in expensive suits, 3 women who looked like they'd walked off magazine covers. They all stood when Damien and Elise arrived, their smiles professionally welcoming but their eyes calculating. Damien, one of the men said, extending his hand. Silver hair, British accent, the kind of presence that commanded rooms. Congratulations on your marriage. Quite the surprise. Marcus, thank you. Damien's grip on Elise's hand tightened fractionally. This is my wife, Elise. Elise Marcus Sutherland. He runs our European operations. Wife. The word still sounded foreign. Elise shook Marcus's hand, managed a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. Nice to meet you. The pleasure is mine. His eyes were sharp, assessing. I must admit we were all expecting Vivian. The table went silent. Damien's expression didn't change. Plans changed. Apparently, Marcus gestured to the empty seats. Please sit. We have much to discuss. The dinner was 3 hours of performing. Elise sat beside Damien, answered questions when spoken to, smiled at the right moments, and tried not to feel like a fraud. The conversation orbited around business deals she didn't understand, market fluctuations that meant nothing to her, names dropped like casual grenades. She was drowning in shallow water, and everyone could see it. So Elise, one of the women said during dessert, Claire something, a venture capitalist with ice blue eyes. What do you do? I work at a museum, Elise said. Archives and acquisitions. How quaint. Claire's smile was sharp. Must be quite a change from that world to this one. It is. I imagine you're still adjusting. The words were sympathetic, but the tone was surgical. It must be overwhelming. Elise met her eyes, saw the challenge there. The assumption that she was weak, temporary, a pretty thing that would break under pressure. Something in her snapped. It is overwhelming, she agreed calmly, but I've spent my whole life being underestimated by people who assumed they were better than me. At least here, people are honest about it. The table went quiet again, different this time, sharper. Claire's smile froze. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Elise took a sip of wine. And that's fine. You don't know me. You're protecting your territory, making sure I understand where I fit in the hierarchy. I get it. She set down her glass. But I didn't marry Damien to climb some social ladder. I married him because I was tired of being invisible. So if you're waiting for me to apologize for existing, you'll be waiting a long time. Dead silence. Then Damien's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. Quick, almost imperceptible. When she glanced at him, his expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pride. Marcus cleared his throat. Well, I think we can all appreciate directness. He raised his glass. To honesty, then. And to the new Mrs. Volkov. The table echoed the toast awkwardly. Claire looked like she'd swallowed glass. Elise drank and tried not to shake. They left an hour later, stepping out into Manhattan night air that tasted like rain. Damien's driver was waiting, but he waved the man off. "Walk?" he asked Elise. She nodded. They walked in silence for 2 blocks, her heels clicking against concrete, his hands in his pockets. Finally, he spoke. "That was impressive." "That was stupid," Elise corrected. "I just made an enemy on my first night. Claire's been looking for an excuse to dislike you since we sat down. You just gave her one she can't weaponize." He glanced at her. "She respects strength. You showed her you have it." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm one mistake away from falling apart." "Then you're exactly where you need to be." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "The night I asked you to marry me, I told you this would get ugly. That people would come at you in ways you couldn't predict. I wasn't exaggerating." "I know. But you handled it, and you didn't apologize for taking up space." He studied her face in the streetlight. "That matters more than you think." Elise looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I still don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But we're doing it together. That counts for something." It did. She wasn't sure what exactly, but it did. They walked back to the apartment in comfortable silence, and Elise realized with a start that comfortable was the last thing she'd expected to feel with Damien Volkov. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Damien traveled to London for business, leaving Elise alone in the apartment with instructions to order whatever she needed and make herself at home. She spent the time reading, working remotely for the museum, and learning to navigate her new life without a roadmap. The press had a field day. Every gossip site ran variations of the same story: scandalous engagement breakup, mysterious new wife, speculation about infidelity, and schemes. Her inbox filled with interview requests she deleted without reading. Vivian gave a tearful statement to Page 6 about betrayal and broken hearts. Her mother released a carefully worded comment expressing disappointment. Elise ignored all of it. When Damien returned, he brought her a first edition of her favorite novel from a rare bookshop in Notting Hill. It was a small thing, thoughtful, the kind of gesture that didn't fit the ruthless businessman reputation. "Thank you," she said, holding the book like it might evaporate. "You mentioned it once, at the museum fundraiser." He shrugged out of his coat. "Figured you might like the real thing." "You remembered." "I remember everything you've said to me, Elise. All 6 conversations." He smiled slightly. 7 now." Something warm unfurled in her chest, dangerous. She pushed it down. They settled into a routine. Breakfast together when his schedule allowed. Evenings mostly separate, him working in his office while she read or worked on her own projects. Occasional dinners out when appearances demanded it. It was polite, civil, the kind of marriage that existed on paper and in public but nowhere else. Except sometimes, late at night when neither of them could sleep, they'd end up in the kitchen at the same time, making tea, talking about nothing important, books, art, the kind of conversation that had no agenda. Those were the moments Elise started to dread because they made her forget this was temporary. 1 month into their arrangement, Damien came home early with a grim expression and a folder full of photographs. "We need to talk," he said, spreading the images across the dining table. Elise's stomach dropped. The photos showed her, leaving the apartment, walking to the museum, having coffee at her favorite cafe, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. "Someone's watching you," Damien said flatly. "Has been for about a week." "Who?" "I don't know yet, but I have people looking into it." His jaw was tight. "Until we figure out who and why, you're not going anywhere without security." "Security? Damien, I'm not. This isn't negotiable." He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something close to fear. "People know you're my wife. That makes you a target. I won't take chances with your safety." Elise looked at the photographs again. Her own face, unaware and vulnerable, captured by someone she'd never seen. The numbness she'd felt at the marriage license office returned, colder this time. "What kind of enemies do you have?" she asked quietly. "The kind who'd hurt you to hurt me." He gathered the photos, his movements sharp. "I should have anticipated this. Should have had protection in place from day one. You couldn't have known. I should have." He slammed the folder shut. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." Elise stood, moved around the table until she was close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the muscle jumping in his jaw. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. He went still. "I'm okay," she said. "Nothing's happened. We caught it early." This time. His voice was rough. "But if something happens to you because of me, then we'll deal with it. Together." She squeezed his arm gently. "That's what you said, right? We're in this together?" He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, the ruthless businessman facade cracking just enough for her to see the man underneath. Complicated, worried, human. "Yeah," he said finally. "Together." The security started the next day, a detail of two men who followed her at a discreet distance whenever she left the apartment. It was suffocating and necessary, and made her feel like she was living in a cage made of protection. But the photographs stopped. Damien worked longer hours, chasing leads on who'd been watching her. Elise tried to return to normal, work, reading, the small routines that made her feel human. But normal was gone, replaced by this strange new reality where danger lurked in shadows, and the man she'd married was equal parts protector and stranger. 2 weeks later, he came home just after midnight. Elise was still awake, curled up on the sofa with a book she'd read 3 times without absorbing a single word. "Found him," Damien said without preamble. She set down the book. "Who?" "Viktor Kozlov, Russian Mafia, works the East Coast. He's been trying to muscle in on some of my shipment routes." Damien poured himself a drink, downed it in one swallow. The photos were reconnaissance. He wanted to know if you were a weakness. "And am I?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're just a contract or something more." The air between them changed, thickened, became something neither of them had acknowledged before. "What do you want me to be?" Elise asked quietly. Damien set down his glass, crossed the room until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I want you to be safe," he said. "Everything else is complicated." "I signed up for complicated." "No, you signed up for a business arrangement with clear boundaries. This is different." His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was careful, almost reverent. "I'm breaking the rules, Elise." Her heart hammered. "What rules?" "The ones I set to keep this simple, to keep you at arm's length." His thumb brushed her cheek. "But you make it impossible." She should have stepped back, should have reminded him of the contract, the timeline, the careful distance they'd maintained. Instead, she leaned into his touch like a flower toward sunlight. "Maybe simple was never the point," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something that might break. Elise's eyes fluttered closed, her hands finding his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palms. When they pulled apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said roughly. "I know." "We can stop. Go back to how it was." "I don't want to go back." He pulled away enough to study her face, searching for doubt. She had plenty. Doubt was her constant companion. But she was also tired of letting fear make her decisions. "Neither do I," he admitted. They stood there in the quiet apartment, two people who'd married for survival and found something neither of them had planned for. It was messy, complicated. Nothing like the neat arrangement they'd outlined in a contract. It was also the first real thing Elise had felt in years. "So what now?" she asked. Damien's mouth curved. "Now we figure it out as we go." That's not very reassuring. "No," he agreed, "but it's honest." And somehow that was enough. The kiss changed everything and nothing at once. They still lived in separate bedrooms, still maintained their careful routines, but now there were small touches that hadn't existed before. Damien's hand at the small of her back when they walked into restaurants. Elise's fingers brushing his when she handed him coffee in the morning. Moments that felt stolen, even though they belonged to each other on paper. 3 days after Viktor Kozlov's name entered their lives, Damien's head of security brought news that made the careful peace they'd built feel fragile as glass. "Kozlov's moved," Roman said, spreading surveillance photos across Damien's desk. Elise sat in the corner chair, technically not part of the meeting, but no longer excluded from them either. "He's meeting with the Calabrese family. That's not a casual conversation." Damien's expression went cold. "When?" Tomorrow night. Warehouse in Red Hook. Roman tapped one of the photos. My source says he's pitching them an alliance. You're shipping routes in exchange for muscle. The Calabrese family doesn't need my roots. No, but they need what you move through them. Roman's jaw tightened. Kozlov's offering them a piece of your arms trade. The room went silent. Elise felt ice slide down her spine. Arms trade. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and suddenly the man sitting across the desk felt like a stranger again. Damien's eyes cut to her. Elise, I'll step out, she said quietly, already standing. No. His voice was sharp. Sit. She sat, her hands twisting in her lap. Roman glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable. Roman, give us a minute, Damien said. The security chief left without argument. The door clicked shut, sealing them in silence. Elise forced herself to meet Damien's eyes. Arms trade. Yes. You move weapons. Among other things. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. Did you think my money came from legitimate business ventures? I didn't think about it at all. The admission felt like failure. I should have, but I didn't. Because you didn't want to know, he said, not unkindly. That was the point of the contract, Elise. You get distance, safety, no responsibility for what I do. Except now I'm not at a distance anymore. She wrapped her arms around herself. Now I'm involved whether I wanted to be or not. Damien stood, moved around the desk, and crouched in front of her chair so they were eye level. I won't apologize for who I am. I can't. But I will give you an out if you want one. An out? The contract has a clause. Either party can walk away with 30 days' notice. His face was carefully neutral. You want to leave, I won't fight you. You'll get everything I promised. Clean break. Elise looked at him, this man who'd given her freedom and then slowly, carefully, given her something more dangerous. This man who moved weapons and kissed her like she was precious. The contradiction should have terrified her. It did terrify her, but not enough to walk away. I'm not leaving, she said. You should. Probably. She reached out, touched his face, felt the rough stubble under her palm. But I'm not. Something broke in his expression. Relief mixed with something darker. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Then you need to understand what you're staying for. No more distance. No more pretending. Okay. He stood, pulling her up with him. The arms trade is one piece. I move other things too, information, occasionally people who need to disappear. I have legitimate businesses that cover the rest. Real estate, shipping, tech investments. But the foundation. He paused. The foundation is built on violence, Elise. Deals made with threats. Enemies who don't just compete, they eliminate. Like Kozlov. Like Kozlov. Damien's grip on her hand tightened. He wants what I have, and he's willing to kill for it. That photo surveillance? That was him testing to see if you were worth using, if you were someone I cared about enough to leverage. And am I? You know you are. The words were rough, honest. Which means you're in danger, real danger, the kind that doesn't go away just because we have security. Elise's throat went tight. So what do we do? We eliminate the threat. He said it simply, like he was discussing a business merger. Kozlov meets with the Calabrese family tomorrow. I'll be there. I'll make it clear that touching you means war. That should be enough. And if it's not, his eyes went dark. Then I'll do what I always do, whatever it takes. She should have been horrified, should have seen the man in front of her for what he was, dangerous, ruthless, capable of things that would keep her awake at night. But all she could think about was the way he'd said, you know you are, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I want to come with you, she said. Absolutely not. Damien, no. He released her hand, put distance between them. You stay here, with Roman and the security team. You stay safe. I'm tired of being kept safe while you walk into danger alone. That's the deal, Elise. I handle the ugly parts. You don't have to see it. What if I want to see it? She stepped closer, refusing to let him retreat. What if I need to understand who you really are, not just the version you show me over breakfast? He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. Why? Because I'm falling in love with you, and I need to know what that means. The words hung between them, raw and terrifying. Damien went completely still, his face unreadable. "You can't," he said finally. "Too late. Elise, I'm not asking you to say it back. I'm not asking for anything except honesty." She held his gaze. "If I'm staying in this marriage, in this life, I need to see all of it, the good and the bad. No more walls." He looked at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. Then he exhaled slowly and nodded once. "Okay, but you stay in the car. You don't get out. You don't engage. You're an observer, nothing more. Deal. And if something goes wrong, then we handle it together," she finished. "That's what you keep saying, right? Together?" His mouth curved despite everything. "You're going to be the death of me. Or the saving of you. Jury's still out." The warehouse in Red Hook looked exactly like every movie cliché Elise had ever seen. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, the kind of place where deals went bad and bodies disappeared. She sat in the back seat of Damien's SUV, Roman behind the wheel, watching him walk toward the building with 3 of his men flanking him like shadows. "He's good at this," Roman said quietly, eyes never leaving Damien's back. "Reading rooms, knowing when to push, when to yield. You don't survive this business without that instinct." "How long have you worked for him?" 8 years, since he was still building his territory." Roman glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "He's different with you." "Different how?" "Softer. More human." He paused. I wasn't sure he remembered how to be either of those things. Before Elise could respond, movement caught her eye. A black sedan pulled up to the warehouse entrance, disgorging 4 men in expensive suits. The Calabrese family, she assumed. They disappeared inside, and the waiting began. 15 minutes passed. 20. Elise's nails dug crescents into her palms. Roman's hand rested casually on his gun, his body coiled tension. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly. "What?" The warehouse exploded. Not literally. No fire, no debris. But the sound of gunfire erupted from inside, sharp cracks that echoed across the waterfront. Roman was already moving, yelling into his radio, but Elise's entire world had narrowed to one thought. Damien was in there. "Stay in the car," Roman barked, throwing open his door. Elise didn't listen. She was out and running before her brain could catch up to her body, ignoring Roman's shouts, her heels loud on broken asphalt. The warehouse door hung open, and she could see muzzle flashes inside, hear men shouting in languages she didn't understand. Then Damien emerged, blood on his shirt, a gun in his hand, his face a mask of controlled fury. He saw her, and his expression shifted to pure horror. "Get down!" She dropped instinctively, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. A bullet sparked off the metal wall where her head had been seconds before. Damien was on her immediately, covering her body with his, returning fire over his shoulder with terrifying precision. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled in her ear. "Saving you? By getting yourself killed?" He fired again. Someone screamed. "We're leaving! Now!" He hauled her up, half dragging her toward the SUV, while his men provided cover. Glass shattered. More gunfire. Roman appeared from nowhere, laying down suppressing fire that gave them the seconds they needed. They piled into the vehicle, Damien shoving Elise into the back seat and diving in after her. Roman floored it before the door was fully closed, tires screaming as they fishtailed away from the warehouse. Elise's ears rang, her hands shook. Adrenaline made everything feel sharp and unreal at once. "Is anyone following?" Damien asked, his voice deadly calm. "No," Roman said, checking mirrors. "We're clear. Good. Get us home." Then Damien turned to Elise, and the calm evaporated. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice was low, furious, barely controlled. "You could have been killed, do you understand that? 1 bullet, 1 second slower, and you'd be dead. You were in there, with trained men and a plan. You ran into a firefight with no weapon, no training, no—" He cut himself off, jaw working. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to risk yourself for me." "Why not?" she shot back, finding her own anger. "You do it for me." "That's different." "How? How is it different?" "Because I'm expendable." The words exploded out of him, raw and jagged. "Because if I die, the world loses someone who deserves it. If you die, I lose the only good thing I've ever had. The silence that followed was deafening. Damien turned away, staring out the window, his shoulders rigid. Blood from a cut on his arm dripped onto the leather seat. Elise reached for him instinctively, her hands finding his face, turning him back to her. "You're not expendable," she said fiercely. "Not to me, never to me." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man drowning. "You shouldn't have come." "I know. You shouldn't have run toward the gunfire." "I know that too." "Then why did you?" "Because watching you walk into danger while I sat safe was worse than any bullet." She pressed her forehead to his. "I meant what I said. I'm falling in love with you. That means your life matters as much as mine." His hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the violence still humming through him. "I can't lose you, Elise. I won't survive it." "Then don't push me away." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, tasting like fear and relief and something too big for either of them to name. When they broke apart, his thumb traced her cheekbone. "We need to talk about what happened in there," he said. "Was it Kozlov?" "No, it was a setup. Kozlov never showed. The Calabrese family tried to take me out, probably at his suggestion." His jaw tightened. "They failed." "And now?" "Now it's war." He said it simply, inevitably. "They came at me directly. That breaks every rule. I have to respond, or I look weak." Elise processed this, the reality of his world settling over her like a weight. "How do you respond?" "Carefully, strategically." He paused. "Violently enough to make a point." "Will more people die?" "Yes." The honesty was brutal, refreshing, terrible. "Can you live with that?" he asked quietly. "Knowing what I have to do, what I am?" Elise looked at this man who'd given her freedom and then somehow become her whole world. This man covered in blood from a fight he hadn't started but would finish. This man who'd thrown himself over her body to shield her from bullets. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try." Something that might have been hope flickered in his eyes. "That's more than I deserve." Probably, but I'm not great at doing what I should." She managed a shaky smile. "I married you, didn't I?" Despite everything, the violence, the fear, the blood on his clothes, he laughed. It was a rough sound, surprised and genuine. "Yeah, you did." They made it back to the apartment without incident. Roman swept the building before letting them inside, and Damien immediately disappeared into the bathroom to clean up. Elise sat on the sofa, still wearing her blood-stained clothes, still shaking from adrenaline she couldn't burn off. When Damien emerged 20 minutes later, freshly showered and bandaged, he found her exactly where he'd left her. "Hey," he said softly, crouching in front of her. "You okay?" "I watched you almost die tonight." "But I didn't." "You could have." Her voice cracked. "That's what you do, isn't it? Walk into situations where you might not walk back out?" "Sometimes." "How do you live with that?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think about it. If I thought about it, I'd freeze up, hesitate. And in my world, hesitation kills you." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He took her hands. "I can't promise you safety, Elise. I can't promise you normal. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to come home to you every time. That's the best I've got." It wasn't enough. It was everything. Elise pulled him up onto the sofa beside her, curled into his side, felt his arm come around her shoulders. They sat in silence, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances, and somehow made it mean something. "What happens now?" she asked eventually. "Now I make calls, arrange meetings, send messages that can't be ignored." His fingers traced patterns on her arm, absent and soothing. "And you stay here, protected, until this is over." "How long will that take?" "Days, maybe weeks. And if something happens to you during those days or weeks, it won't. You can't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I'm choosing to believe it anyway, because the alternative means imagining a world where I don't come back to you, and I won't do that." Elise tilted her head back to look at him. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If this gets too dangerous, if staying with me puts you at risk you wouldn't normally take, you tell me. You don't make decisions based on protecting me if it means getting yourself killed." "I can't promise that." "Damien, I can't." His voice was firm. Because keeping you safe is the only thing that matters anymore. Everything else is just business. It should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like a noose tightening around both their necks. "We're going to get each other killed, aren't we?" she said quietly. "Maybe." He kissed the top of her head. "But at least we'll go down fighting." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in tension. Damien worked from home, his office constantly filled with men whose faces Elise tried not to memorize. Roman's security team doubled. Every exit and entrance to the building was monitored. Elise felt like she was living in a very expensive prison. She threw herself into work, cataloging a new acquisition for the museum remotely, but her mind kept drifting. Every time Damien left the apartment, even just to meet someone in the lobby, her stomach twisted into knots. Every time he came back, she had to physically stop herself from checking him for injuries. "This is what it's going to be like," she told him one night. Over dinner, neither of them was eating. "Isn't it? Me worrying every time you leave. You worrying about threats I can't see." "Oh, probably. That's not sustainable." "No." He set down his fork. "But the alternative is you leaving, and I'm selfish enough not to want that." "I don't want to leave either." She pushed her plate away. "I just wish there was a middle ground, some way to do this that doesn't feel like we're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop." "There isn't, not in my world." He reached across the table, took her hand. "But I'm working on it." "Working on what?" "An exit strategy. A way to step back from the more dangerous aspects without losing everything I've built." He paused. "It'll take time, and it'll be complicated. But if it means keeping you without constantly putting you at risk, I'll do it." Elise's chest went tight. "You'd walk away from this for me?" "I'd walk away from this for us." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "I spent 35 years building an empire I didn't particularly enjoy, just to prove I could. You've been in my life for 2 months, and you've made me want something different, something better. What if you resent me for it later? Then we'll figure it out, like we figure out everything else." He smiled slightly. "Together, remember?" She remembered. That night, they broke another unspoken rule. Elise ended up in Damien's bed, not because of passion or planning, but because she couldn't stand the distance anymore. They lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers in her hair, talking about nothing and everything until the early hours of morning. "Tell me something no one knows about you," she said sleepily. "I wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid." She lifted her head to look at him. "Seriously?" "Seriously. My mother got sick when I was 12. Cancer. The doctors couldn't save her, but they tried. They fought for her until the end." His voice was distant. "I wanted to be like them. Save people." "What changed?" "My father died 2 years later. Gambling debts he couldn't pay. They found him in the river with a bullet in his head." His jaw tightened. Turned out saving people was complicated, but eliminating threats? That was straightforward. Elise pressed a kiss to his chest right over his heart. "You save people too, just differently." "I hurt people, Elise. Let's not romanticize it." "I'm not romanticizing it. I'm just saying you're more than the worst thing you've ever done." She propped herself up on her elbow. "You gave me a way out of a life that was killing me slowly. You've kept your word about every promise you made. You're trying to build something better. That counts." He looked at her like she was something miraculous and impossible. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See the best in people who don't deserve it." "Maybe you deserve it more than you think." She kissed him softly. "Or maybe I'm just stubborn." "Definitely stubborn," he agreed, pulling her back down against him. "It's one of your better qualities." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Elise dreamed of a life where gunfire and threats didn't exist, where she and Damien were just two people who'd found each other without all the complications. But when she woke, reality was waiting. Damien was already up, pacing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone. When he saw she was awake, he ended the call quickly. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "Kozlov made a move. He hit one of my warehouses last night, killed 3 of my men." His voice was flat, controlled. "It's time to end this." "How?" "I meet with him, face to face. We settle this the old way." Ice flooded Elise's veins. The old way meaning what? Meaning one of us doesn't walk away. She was out of bed and across the room before she could think. No, absolutely not. You are not going to... I don't have a choice. He caught her hands, held them tight. He killed my men, Elise. If I don't respond, others will think I'm weak. They'll come at me, at us. This ends tonight, one way or another. Then let me come with you. No. Damien, no. His grip tightened. You stay here where it's safe. You stay alive, that's non-negotiable. You don't get to make that decision alone. Yes, I do, because I'm the one who dragged you into this world. I'm the one who made you a target, and I'll be damned if I let you get hurt because of it. They stared at each other, two people who loved each other enough to be terrified and stubborn in equal measure. If you don't come back, Elise said quietly, I will never forgive you. His expression softened. If I don't come back, forgiveness won't matter. It will to me. He kissed her then, long and deep and desperate, like goodbye, like promise, like everything they were and hadn't had time to become. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said roughly. I should have said it before. Should have said it the night you told me, but I was scared it would make this harder. Tears burned Elise's eyes. It doesn't make it harder, it makes it matter. Yeah. He kissed her one more time. Stay safe. Roman will keep you here. Don't fight him. Come back to me. I will. I promise. Then he was gone, and Elise was left alone in his bedroom, surrounded by the scent of him, praying to a higher power she didn't believe in, that promises were things Damien Volkov knew how to keep. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Elise sat on the sofa, phone clutched in her hand, watching the screen like it might spontaneously produce answers. Roman stood by the window, his posture military straight, his hand never far from his weapon. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make the waiting worse. At midnight, her phone rang. Unknown number. Roman's head snapped toward her. Don't answer it. She answered it anyway. Mrs. Volkov? The voice was accented, Russian, unfamiliar. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. Ice crystallized in her veins. Who is this? Someone who has something of yours. Or should I say, someone? A pause, heavy with intention. Your husband is currently my guest. He's alive. For now. The world tilted sideways. Roman was already moving, pulling out his own phone, barking orders into it. If you hurt him, Elise's voice shook despite her best effort. Hurt him? Mrs. Volkov, I'm offering you a trade. His life for something much simpler. The voice was almost pleasant, conversational. You? Me? You see, your husband is a difficult man to leverage. He doesn't care about money. He has plenty. He doesn't care about territory. He can always take more. But you? Another pause. You, he cares about, quite desperately, I'm told. Roman was shaking his head violently, mouthing the word no over and over. Where? Elise asked. Elise, don't... Roman grabbed for the phone. She pulled away from him. Where do you want me? The old textile factory on the south side. You know it? I'll find it. Come alone. If I see security, if I see anyone but you, your husband dies. You have 1 hour. The line went dead. Roman looked at her with something close to horror. You're not seriously considering this. He has Damien. And if you go, he'll have both of you. Then you're both dead, and this was all for nothing. Roman's voice was sharp. We call in backup. We plan an extraction. We don't hand you over like a sacrificial lamb. There's no time for that. Elise was already moving toward the bedroom, pulling on jeans and a dark sweater with trembling hands. You heard him. 1 hour. Elise, listen to me. Roman followed her. I've been in this business for 15 years. I know how this works. Kozlov doesn't want a trade. He wants leverage. The moment you walk in there, you lose any advantage we have. What advantage? He already has Damien. She shoved her feet into sneakers. I'm not letting him die because I was too scared to act. Damien would want you safe. Damien can be angry about it later. She grabbed her phone and keys. Are you going to help me, or do I have to figure this out myself? Roman stared at her, clearly warring with about 15 different protocols. Then he exhaled sharply. If I let you do this and you both die, I'm going to hell. Probably. And if Damien survives and finds out I helped you, he'll kill me himself. Also probably. She met his eyes. But I'm going with or without you. Your choice. He swore in Russian, long and creative. Fine. But we do this smart. You wear a wire. I go in separately, position myself for extraction. And if things go sideways, you get Damien out first. Elise, that's the deal, Roman. Damien's life over mine. Always. He looked at her for a long moment, and something that might have been respect flickered across his face. He found a good one. He found a stubborn one. She grabbed her jacket. Let's go. The drive to the south side took 40 minutes through empty streets. Roman outfitted her with a wire so small she could barely feel it taped between her shoulder blades. He went over the plan 3 times. She walks in, assesses the situation, stalls for time while he gets into position. Simple. Except nothing about this was simple. The textile factory loomed against the night sky like a skeleton, all broken windows and rusted framework. A single light burned in what looked like the main floor. Elise's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. I'm going in, she said, hand on the door handle. Wait for my signal. 3 minutes. Roman's jaw was tight. And Elise? If you get a chance to run, you take it. Don't be a hero. Too late for that. She slid out of the car before he could argue, her feet crunching on gravel as she approached the factory entrance. The door hung half off its hinges, opening with a shriek of protesting metal. Inside, the air smelled like rust and decay. Mrs. Volkov, the voice echoed from somewhere above. Punctual. I appreciate that. She moved toward the light, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The main floor was massive, filled with abandoned machinery and shadows that moved wrong. Then she saw him. Damien knelt in the center of the space, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood crusting one side of his face. 2 men stood behind him, guns drawn, and in front of him, leaning casually against a support beam like he had all the time in the world, was Viktor Kozlov. He was younger than Elise expected, mid-30s, handsome in a cold way, dressed like he was attending a business meeting rather than a hostage situation. You came, he said, sounding genuinely pleased. I wasn't sure you would. Damien insisted you were smarter than that. Elise forced herself to look at Damien. His eyes blazed with fury and fear in equal measure. His mouth moved silently. Leave. She looked back at Kozlov. I'm here. Let him go. In time. First, I want to understand something. Kozlov pushed off the beam, circling her slowly. What does a man like Damien Volkov see in a woman like you? You're not glamorous, not connected, not even particularly interesting from what I've gathered. Guess he has low standards, Kozlov laughed. Or perhaps he sees something I don't, something worth dying for. He stopped in front of her. Is he worth dying for, Mrs. Volkov? Yes. Even knowing what he is? What he's done? Kozlov tilted his head. The people he's killed, the lives he's ruined, you can stand there and tell me he's worth your life? I can stand here and tell you that you're wasting time. Elise kept her voice steady. You wanted me. You have me. Now let him go. I don't think so. Kozlov moved back toward Damien, pulling a gun from inside his jacket. You see, letting him go defeats the purpose. I don't just want to hurt him. I want to destroy him. And the best way to destroy a man like Damien Volkov, he pressed the barrel against Damien's temple, is to make him watch someone he loves die. Damien lunged against his restraints, his voice raw. Touch her and I'll tear you apart with my bare hands. You'll try, Kozlov smiled, but you'll fail. Because that's what happens when you let yourself care about someone in this business. You become weak, vulnerable, human. If being human is a weakness, Elise said quietly, then I'll take it over whatever you are. Kozlov's smile faltered. Bold words for someone in your position. Not bold, just honest. She took a step forward, ignoring every survival instinct screaming at her to run. You're right about one thing. I'm not glamorous or connected or particularly interesting. But I see Damien for who he actually is, not just the reputation. And that's something you'll never understand because you don't see people at all. You just see tools or obstacles. And what am I to you? Someone who's about to make a very big mistake. Kozlov raised an eyebrow. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Elise stopped 6 feet away from Damien, her eyes locked on Kozlov. You kill either of us, and you become every crime family's target. Because the one rule everyone follows is you don't make it personal. You broke into neutral territory. You took a man's wife. You turned business into a blood feud. She paused. How long do you think you'll last when everyone decides you're too unstable to work with? For the first time, something flickered in Kozlov's expression. Uncertainty. She's right, Damien said, his voice deadly calm now. Kill her, kill me, and you sign your own death warrant. Every family from here to Moscow will come for you, not because they like me, because you'll prove you can't be trusted to follow the rules. Kozlov's gun hand wavered slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? Damien held his gaze. Test it. Pull that trigger. See what happens. The silence stretched taut as wire. Elise's heart hammered so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Roman's 3 minutes had to be up, any second now. A window shattered. Kozlov's men spun toward the sound, guns raised. In that split second of distraction, Damien moved. He surged to his feet despite his bound hands, driving his shoulder into Kozlov's chest, with enough force to send them both crashing to the floor. The gun went flying. Elise dove for it, her fingers closing around cold metal just as one of Kozlov's men turned toward her. Don't! She aimed the gun at him, her hands shaking. I don't want to shoot you, but I will. The man hesitated, calculating. Then Roman appeared from the shadows, his own weapon drawn, and the calculation shifted. The man lowered his gun slowly. On the ground, Roman barked. Both of you, now! They complied, and Roman moved in to secure them while Elise rushed to where Damien had Kozlov pinned. Blood streamed from Kozlov's nose, and Damien's hands were still zip-tied, but he'd somehow gotten the upper hand anyway. Elise, Damien said through gritted teeth. Knife, back pocket. She fumbled for it, managed to cut through the zip ties with shaking hands. The moment he was free, Damien grabbed Kozlov by the throat and hauled him upright. You made a mistake, Damien said softly, dangerously. You went after my wife. Kozlov's face was turning purple. So kill me. Prove her wrong. Damien's fingers tightened. Elise saw the moment he wanted to do exactly that. Saw the fury and fear of the last few hours coalesce into violence. His knuckles went white. Kozlov's eyes bulged. Then Damien looked at her, really looked at her. And something in his expression shifted. He released Kozlov, who dropped to the floor gasping. I'm not going to kill you, Damien said. That would be too easy. Instead, I'm going to make you irrelevant. He pulled out his phone, made a call. Marcus, it's done. Kozlov's alive. Spread the word. He broke the rules, went after a civilian, turned business personal. Anyone who works with him after this is blacklisted. He paused. Make sure everyone knows. He hung up and looked down at Kozlov. By morning, you won't be able to move product in this city. By next week, you won't be able to show your face. You wanted to destroy me? Congratulations. You destroyed yourself instead. Kozlov stared up at him, and Elise saw the exact moment he realized what Damien had done. Death would have been kinder. This was something worse. Exile. Irrelevance. Social and professional annihilation. You can't do this, Kozlov rasped. I just did. Damien turned away from him like he was nothing. Roman, call the cleanup crew and get these men out of my sight before I change my mind about mercy. Then he was moving toward Elise, pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking, felt the adrenaline still coursing through him, felt how close they'd both come to not making it out of this building. You came for me, he said against her hair. Of course I came for you. You could have been killed. So could you. She pulled back enough to see his face, taking in the cut above his eye, the bruising on his jaw. We're both still here. That's what matters. You're insane, you know that? But he was almost smiling. Completely, absolutely insane. I married you, didn't I? He kissed her then, hard and desperate and alive, and Elise kissed him back with everything she had. Because they'd survived. Because love was terrifying and worth it. Because walking into that factory had been the scariest and most certain thing she'd ever done. When they broke apart, Roman was studiously looking elsewhere, but there was a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "We should go," he said. "Police will show up eventually." They left Kozlov sitting in the ruins of his reputation and drove back to the apartment in silence. Elise sat pressed against Damien's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them still shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear. "I need to tell you something," Damien said as they rode the elevator up. "Okay. After tonight, after coming that close to losing you, I can't do this anymore." He looked at her. "The life, the violence, the constant threats. I'm done." Elise blinked. "What?" "I've been working on it for weeks. An exit strategy, legal businesses, legitimate investments, a way to step back without losing everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "Tonight just made it clear I can't wait. I won't survive watching you walk into danger again." "Damien, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, because you were right. I'm not expendable. Not to you. And if I keep living like I am, eventually I'll lose you or you'll lose me, and I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't live in a world where that happens." She took his face in her hands, made him look at her. "Are you sure? This is your whole life, everything you've built." "You're my whole life now," he said simply. "Everything else is just noise." The elevator doors opened. They walked into the apartment, their home, their safe place in a world that kept trying to tear them apart. "It'll take time," Damien continued, locking the door behind them. 6 months, maybe longer. I have to transition everything carefully, make sure no one sees it as weakness. But it's happening. I'm choosing you over this, over all of it." Elise felt tears building for the first time since this nightmare started. "What if you regret it?" "I won't." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." He pulled her close again, his forehead resting against hers. "Because the scariest thing that happened tonight wasn't Kozlov putting a gun to my head. It was watching you walk into that factory knowing I couldn't protect you. If I keep living like this, that moment will keep happening, and I'd rather walk away from the Empire than live through that again." "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. More than I thought I could love anything." He kissed her softly. "We're going to build something better. Something that doesn't require you to be brave in warehouses at midnight." "What if I liked being brave in warehouses at midnight?" "Then you're even more insane than I thought." But he was smiling. "Come on, let's get cleaned up. We both look like we lost a fight with a brick wall." They did. Damien's face was a mess of cuts and bruises, and Elise was pretty sure she'd scraped half the skin off her palms when she dove for the gun. They took turns in the bathroom, cleaning wounds with antiseptic that stung like hell, pretending their hands weren't still shaking. When they finally collapsed into bed, the sun was starting to rise outside the windows, painting the city in shades of pink and gold. Elise curled into Damien's side, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong and alive. "What happens when the contract ends?" she asked quietly. "What contract?" "Our marriage contract, the 2-year agreement." He was quiet for a moment. "I forgot about that." "You forgot about the entire premise of our marriage?" "Kind of." His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "Somewhere between the museum fundraiser and tonight, it stopped being about a contract and started being about this. Us." He paused. "If you want out when the 2 years are up, I won't fight you, but I'm hoping you'll want to stay." "I'll want to stay," she said. "You sound pretty sure about that." "I am, because I didn't fall in love with Damien Volkov, the crime boss. I fell in love with the man who remembers what books I like and brings me coffee the way I prefer it and looks at me like I'm the only real thing in his world." She pressed a kiss to his chest. "That man? I'm keeping him." His arm tightened around her. "Good, because I'm keeping you too." They drifted off as the city woke up around them, two people who'd found each other in the chaos and somehow made it mean everything. The next 6 months were a strange kind of whiplash. Damien systematically dismantled his empire piece by careful piece, transitioning operations to trusted associates, divesting from anything that couldn't be made legitimate, building something new from the ashes of who he used to be. Elise watched him navigate it with the same strategic brilliance he'd applied to building his territory in the first place. Except now he was building towards something instead of away from something. There were complications. Associates who didn't understand why he was stepping back. Rivals who saw vulnerability and tried to exploit it. Old debts that needed settling before he could walk away clean. But Damien handled each crisis with patience Elise hadn't known he possessed. And slowly, painfully slowly, the violence receded from their lives like a tide going out. They settled into something that looked almost normal, dinners together most nights, weekends where they didn't talk about business or threats or exit strategies. Conversations about the future that didn't include the assumption one or both of them might not live to see it. Elise went back to working at the museum full-time, throwing herself into an exhibition on Renaissance art that consumed her days and gave her something to care about beyond Damien's safety. He surprised her one afternoon by showing up at the museum with lunch and an apology for missing breakfast. "You didn't have to come all the way down here," she said, accepting the sandwich he'd brought from her favorite deli. "I wanted to." He looked around the restoration room where she worked, taking in the careful chaos of her domain. "I never got to see you in your element before. It's impressive. It's just art conservation. It's you doing what you love without anyone telling you you're not good enough at it." He smiled. "That's more than impressive. That's everything." They ate lunch surrounded by paintings waiting to be restored, and Elise realized this was what happy felt like. Not perfect. They were both too broken for perfect. But real. Solid. Something they'd built together instead of stumbled into. 4 months after the textile factory, Damien came home with papers that made Elise's breath catch. "What are these?" she asked, looking at the legal documents spread across the dining table. "Transfer papers. I sold the shipping operation to Marcus. He's taking over the entire East Coast territory." Damien loosened his tie, and she could see the tension in his shoulders starting to ease. "As of Friday, I'm officially out of the life." "Officially?" "Officially." He sat down heavily, like he'd been carrying a weight for months and could finally set it down. "There might be loose ends here and there, people who need time to adjust. But the dangerous part? The part where you have to worry about me not coming home? That's done." Elise moved around the table and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his shoulder. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Free." He laughed shakily. "I've been this person for so long I'm not sure who I am without it. You're the man I married, the man who reads me passages from books he thinks I'll like and makes terrible coffee and falls asleep during movies." She kissed his temple. "That's who you are. Everything else was just circumstances. Those circumstances defined me for 15 years. And now different circumstances will define you." She came around to sit in his lap, facing him. "You get to choose who you become next. That's not terrifying, that's possibility." He looked at her with something that might have been awe. "How did I get this lucky? You asked the right girl to marry you. The right girl who was crazy enough to say yes. Well, that too." He kissed her, slow and thorough, and Elise thought about how far they'd come from that first awkward conversation in her father's study. How she'd been so scared and he'd been so clinical, and somehow they'd alchemized fear and pragmatism into this, love that was messy and real and worth every terrifying moment. "I need to ask you something," Damien said when they broke apart. "Okay. Our 2-year contract is almost up. 3 more months." He paused. "I want to renew our vows. For real this time. No contract, no timeline, no exit strategy. Just us choosing each other because we want to, not because we need to." Elise felt tears prick her eyes. "You want a real wedding?" "I want to stand in front of people who matter and tell them you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I want vows that mean something beyond business arrangements." His hands framed her face. "I want to marry you again, Elise. Properly." "We're already married. We're already legally bound. I want us to be emotionally bound too. Deliberately. No more pretending this started as anything other than what it is now." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes." He kissed her again, and this time when they broke apart, they were both smiling through tears that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the opposite. They planned the ceremony for a Saturday in June, 2 years and 3 days after they'd signed their marriage license in that government office. It was small, just the people who'd mattered through everything. Roman stood as Damien's best man, looking uncomfortable in a suit that wasn't tactical gear. Marcus flew in from London with a gift and a knowing smile. A handful of museum colleagues came as Elise's guests, the closest thing she had to family now. The venue was a garden outside the city, all wild roses and honeysuckle, the kind of place that felt like a secret. Elise wore a simple ivory dress and her grandmother's pearls. Damien wore a dark suit and an expression that suggested he might actually cry when she walked down the aisle. He did, just a little. Elise pretended not to notice. The officiant was someone Marcus knew, a retired judge who asked no questions about their unusual circumstances. The vows they'd written themselves, staying up until 3 in the morning the night before to get them right. When it was Damien's turn, he took Elise's hands and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear, but looked only at her. 2 years ago, I asked you to marry me for all the wrong reasons. I needed someone I could trust, someone who wouldn't try to destroy me, someone who'd let me keep my walls up and my heart locked away. He paused. You said yes for your own reasons, to escape a life that was suffocating you, to be seen when you'd spent 26 years invisible. And somehow, in all that brokenness and pragmatism, we found something neither of us expected. His voice roughened slightly. You taught me that being human isn't weakness, that letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself, that love is something you choose every day, not something that happens to you. He squeezed her hands. I choose you, Elise, not because I need you, though I do, not because I'm scared of losing you, though I am, but because you're the best part of every day, because you make me want to be better than I was, because when I look at you, I see home. Elise was crying now, not even trying to hide it. I promise to never stop seeing you, Damien continued, to build a life with you that's worth the risks we took to find each other, to remember that the scared girl hiding behind a marble column chose to be brave, and I get to be the person she was brave for. He smiled through his own tears. I love you. I'll always love you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. The garden was silent except for birds and someone sniffling. Then it was Elise's turn, and she had to take a breath to steady herself before she could speak. I spent most of my life invisible, she said. Not because I wanted to be, but because it was easier than fighting to be seen. I learned to take up less space, speak more quietly, want smaller things. I was good at it. So good I almost forgot what it felt like to want anything at all. She looked at Damien through tear-blurred vision. Then you walked into my life and offered me an escape I was too scared to think I deserved. You didn't promise me love or forever. You promised me honesty and space to figure out who I was, and that's exactly what you gave me. Her voice steadied. But you gave me something else too. You gave me a reason to stop being small, to stop apologizing for existing. You looked at me like I was worth seeing, and somewhere along the way, I started to believe you. She smiled. You're not perfect. You're stubborn, and you work too much, and you make terrible coffee. You've done things I'll never fully understand and carry scars I'll never fully see. But you're mine, and I'm yours. Not because a contract said so, but because we chose each other when we didn't have to. Damien's thumb brushed across her knuckles. I promise to keep choosing you, Elise continued, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces we started with, to never let you forget that you're more than the worst thing you've ever done, and you deserve the happiness we found together. She paused. I love you. I've loved you since the night in the kitchen when you told me I was impossible. And I'll love you through whatever comes next because we're better together than we ever were apart. The officiant had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. By the power vested in me, and with considerably more emotion than I was expecting, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again. You may kiss the bride. Also again. Damien pulled Elise into his arms and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world, and for a moment they were. The small crowd applauded, and someone whistled, and Roman muttered something in Russian that was probably inappropriate, but none of it mattered. They were married. For real this time. Forever this time. And the shy girl who had once hidden behind marble columns stood in a garden full of wildflowers, kissed the dangerous man who'd become her entire world, and knew exactly who she was. She was seen, she was loved, she was home. The reception was exactly what Elise had wanted. Simple, genuine, full of people who actually cared whether they lived or died. They ate catered food that was good but not pretentious, drank wine that didn't require a sommelier to explain, and danced to music that made everyone feel 20 years younger. Marcus gave a surprisingly heartfelt toast about watching Damien become human again. Roman got quietly drunk and admitted he'd been certain they'd both end up dead within the first month. "Glad I was wrong," he said, raising his glass with a crooked smile. "You two are either the luckiest or the stupidest people I've ever met. Haven't decided which." "Can it be both?" Elise asked. "Yeah, probably both." As the sun set and the garden lights came on, Damien pulled Elise onto the makeshift dance floor for a song she didn't recognize but felt like it was written for them. Something about finding home in unexpected places. "Happy?" he asked, his hand warm at the small of her back. Terrifyingly happy. She rested her head against his chest, like the kind of happy that makes you wait for something to go wrong. "Nothing's going to go wrong." "You don't know that." "No," he agreed, "but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. That's what you taught me, to believe in things that are terrifying." They swayed together while the music played and their small circle of people watched with expressions that ranged from sentimental to slightly uncomfortable, and Elise thought about how much had changed in 2 years, how she'd gone from invisible to seen, from scared to brave, from a girl who thought she'd never matter to a woman who'd walked into gunfire for the person she loved. The transformation felt impossible. It also felt inevitable, like every moment had been leading here, to this garden, this man, this life they'd somehow built from nothing but honesty and stubbornness. "I need to tell you something," Damien said quietly. Elise pulled back enough to see his face. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. I hope it's not." He looked suddenly nervous, which was so unlike him that her heart started racing. "I've been working on something, a project, and I need your opinion before I commit to it." "Okay. You know how I've been transitioning into legitimate business, real estate, investments, that kind of thing?" "Yes." "Well, I've been looking at properties, buildings that need renovation, and I found one that made me think of you." He paused. "It's an old museum, been closed for 15 years, beautiful building, terrible management, perfect bones." Elise's breath caught. "You bought a museum?" "Not yet, but I could. And I was thinking, if I did, maybe you'd want to run it." His words came faster now, like he was worried she'd say no before he finished. "Not as my wife doing me a favor, as someone who actually knows what they're doing. You'd have complete control, budget, acquisitions, exhibitions, everything. I'd just be the money." She stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You've been talking about what you'd do if you could build a collection from scratch. What stories you'd tell. What pieces you'd prioritize. This could be that. Your museum. Your vision." "Damien, that's..." She couldn't find words big enough. "That's insane. Museums take years to establish. They lose money constantly. There's no guarantee." "I'm not looking for guarantees. I'm looking for something to do with money that actually matters." He touched her face gently. "You matter. What you care about matters. So if you want this, it's yours." Elise felt tears building again, which was getting ridiculous. She'd cried more today than in the entire previous year. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail. And we try something else." His smile was soft. "But I don't think you'll fail. I think you'll build something amazing because that's what you do. You take broken things and make them beautiful." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." She kissed him instead of answering, and he kissed her back. And somewhere behind them, someone wolf whistled. When they broke apart, Elise was smiling so hard her face hurt. "I'll think about it," she whispered, "but I'm pretty sure I'm going to say yes." "Good, because I may have already started the paperwork." "Damien!" "What?" "I was optimistic." She laughed and buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of her life. 2 years ago, she'd been invisible, desperate, trapped in a family that didn't see her. Now she was dancing in a garden with a man who wanted to buy her a museum, surrounded by people who'd helped them survive things that should have killed them. It was too much. It was everything. The party wound down around 11. Guests said their goodbyes with hugs that lasted too long and promises to stay in touch that Elise actually believed. Roman clapped Damien on the shoulder and told Elise to keep him honest, which she assured him she would. Marcus kissed her cheek and whispered that she'd done the impossible, made Damien Volkov into someone worth knowing. Then it was just the two of them, standing in an empty garden full of flowers and fairy lights, holding hands like teenagers. "Ready to go home?" Damien asked. Home. The word still gave her butterflies. Ready. They drove back to the city in comfortable silence, Elise's head resting against the window, watching Manhattan's skyline come into view like a promise. The apartment felt different when they walked in, not physically, but emotionally. Like it had been a way station before and now it was something permanent. Elise kicked off her heels and Damien loosened his tie, and they collapsed onto the sofa with the kind of exhaustion that came from a day full of big emotions and bigger decisions. "That was perfect," Elise said. "It was small. Small is perfect. Small is real." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for today, for the museum idea, for everything. You don't have to thank me for loving you. I know, but I'm going to anyway." She shifted closer, tucking herself against his side. "Tell me about the museum, the building. What's it like?" His face lit up in a way she rarely saw, genuine excitement without the careful control he usually maintained. "It's in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. Built in 1890, closed in 2009 when funding dried up. The architecture is incredible. High ceilings, natural light, these massive windows that overlook the park." He pulled out his phone, showed her photos. "It needs work, a lot of work, but the bones are solid." Elise studied the images, her curator's brain already cataloging possibilities. The exhibition space is huge. 30,000 square feet, plus administrative offices, storage, a lecture hall that seats 200. "Damien, this is..." She couldn't articulate what it was. Overwhelming, perfect, terrifying. "This is a real museum, not a gallery or a small collection. This is legitimate. That's the point. I don't want to give you something half-hearted. If we're doing this, we're doing it right." He squeezed her hand. "But only if you want to. No pressure. You can keep working where you are. I'll sell the building to someone else. No harm done." "Are you kidding? I want this so badly I can barely breathe." She laughed shakily. "I'm just scared I'll mess it up." "You won't. You can't know that." "Yes, I can. Because I've watched you talk about art for 2 years. I've seen the way you light up when you find something beautiful or historically significant. I've heard you talk about accessibility and education and making art matter to people who think museums aren't for them." He turned to face her fully. "You're not going to mess this up because you actually care. That's more than most museum directors can say." Elise felt something settle in her chest. Not confidence exactly, but determination. The same feeling she'd had when she'd said yes to his contract marriage, when she'd walked into that textile factory, when she'd chosen over and over to be brave instead of safe. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." His smile was blinding. "Yeah? Yeah. Let's build a museum." They stayed up until 3 in the morning planning it out. What the mission would be, what collections they'd pursue, how they'd make it financially sustainable. Damien was surprisingly knowledgeable about nonprofit structures and funding models, probably from his years navigating the financial side of various enterprises. Elise contributed her knowledge of art historical significance and contemporary exhibition trends. Together, they sketched out something that felt ambitious but possible. "We should call it something meaningful," Damien said, refilling their coffee mugs. "Not the Volkov Museum, something that represents what it's actually about." "The Prospect Museum of Art and Memory," Elise suggested. "Because art is memory. It's how we remember who we were and imagine who we might become." He looked at her like she'd just said something profound. "That's perfect." They fell asleep on the sofa around dawn, still wearing their wedding clothes, surrounded by notes and sketches and dreams that felt suddenly achievable. The next 3 years were a blur of construction and acquisition and learning how to run a museum from the ground up. Elise threw herself into it with the kind of focus she'd previously reserved for hiding. She hired a small but passionate staff, connected with collectors and donors, traveled to auctions and estate sales to build their initial collection. Damien handled the financial and administrative side, turning out to be surprisingly good at grant writing and board meetings. The Prospect Museum of Art and Memory opened its doors on a rainy Tuesday in October, 3 years and 2 months after Elise had said yes to a contract marriage that had become her entire world. The inaugural exhibition was about transformation, art that documented change, growth, rebirth. It felt appropriate. The opening night was packed. Press, donors, art enthusiasts, curious locals who'd watched the building's renovation and wanted to see what had become of it. Elise wore a simple black dress and her grandmother's pearls, standing near the entrance with Damien beside her, watching people explore something they'd built together. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "Terrified, but good terrified." She squeezed his hand. "This is really happening. You made it happen. We made it happen." A woman approached them then, weaving through the crowd with purpose. It took Elise a moment to recognize her, older, thinner, less polished than the last time they'd seen each other. Vivienne. Elise's stomach dropped. They hadn't spoken in over 3 years, not since that terrible family dinner that had started everything. Vivienne had sent a single text message after the wedding announcement, vicious and bitter, and Elise had blocked her number. She'd assumed that was the end of it, but here she was, standing in Elise's museum, looking at her with an expression that was hard to read. "Hello, Elise?" "Vivienne." Elise kept her voice neutral. Beside her, Damien had gone very still. "I didn't expect to see you here. I almost didn't come, but I saw the press coverage and Vivienne glanced around the gallery, taking in the art, the people, the success radiating from every corner. "I wanted to see what you'd done. Did Mother send you?" "Mother doesn't know I'm here. We're not exactly speaking these days." Vivienne's smile was brittle. "Turns out being the favorite child only lasts until you stop being useful." There was a story there, but Elise didn't ask for it. She just waited. "I came to apologize," Vivienne said finally, "for how I treated you, for years, for everything." Elise felt Damien's hand tighten around hers, a silent offer of support. She appreciated it, but didn't need it, not anymore. "Okay," she said simply. Vivienne blinked. "Okay? That's it? What do you want me to say, Vivienne? That I forgive you? That we can be sisters again?" Elise kept her tone even. "I don't hate you. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm also not interested in pretending we have a relationship we never actually had." "That's fair." Vivienne looked down at her hands. "I was cruel to you. I knew I was being cruel, and I did it anyway because it was easier than acknowledging that you were better than me at being real." "I wasn't better. I was just different." "No, you were better. You didn't perform. You didn't calculate every interaction like it was a chess game. You were just yourself, and I hated you for it because I'd forgotten how to be myself." Vivienne's eyes were shiny now. "Losing Damien was the best thing that ever happened to me. It broke me open enough to see how hollow I'd become." Elise studied her sister, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw someone who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out who she was without it. It was familiar, uncomfortable, almost sympathetic. "What do you want from me?" Elise asked. "Nothing. I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, and I'm sorry it took me this long." Vivienne glanced at Damien, who'd been silent throughout the entire exchange. "You were right to choose her. She was always the better option. I just wish I'd been smart enough to realize it before I lost you both." She turned to leave, but Elise stopped her. "Vivienne," her sister looked back, "I'm not interested in being close. But if you want to visit the museum sometime, as a guest, not as family, you're welcome to." Elise paused. "Everyone deserves a chance to change. I'm proof of that." Something that might have been gratitude flickered across Vivienne's face. "Thank you." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost. Damien exhaled slowly. "You okay?" "Yeah." Elise realized she meant it. "I am. That was closure, I think. Not perfect, but real." "You're very gracious." "I'm not gracious. I'm just done carrying anger that doesn't serve me anymore." She looked up at him. "You taught me that. How to let go of things that weigh you down." "Pretty sure you taught me that." "Then we taught each other." She smiled. "Come on. I see a donor I need to charm, and you owe me a dance later when this is all over. Deal." The museum became everything Elise had hoped it would be, a space that felt accessible without being condescending, Educational without being pretentious, beautiful without being intimidating. They hosted school groups and community events. They built a collection that told stories about human experience, not just European masters and gilded frames. Within a year, they were financially stable. Within 2, they were thriving. Elise found herself doing interviews about museum accessibility and contemporary curation. Damien sat on boards and committees, leveraging his business acumen for causes that actually helped people. They built a life that looked nothing like what either of them had expected, and everything like what they needed. 5 years after their garden wedding, Elise woke up to find Damien already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, still half asleep. "Nothing. Just thinking about how different my life would be if you'd said no that night." "You'd probably be miserable married to Vivian." "I'd definitely be miserable married to Vivian." He brushed hair off her forehead. "But I'd also still be the person I was. Cold, calculating, alone even when surrounded by people. You're not that person anymore." "No, because of you." She rolled her eyes. "That's corny." "Doesn't make it less true." He propped himself up on one elbow. "I was thinking we should do something to market. The 5 years. We already did. We went to that restaurant you hate, and I made you eat snails. I meant something bigger, a trip, maybe. Somewhere neither of us has been." Elise considered this. They'd been so focused on the museum and building their life that they'd barely traveled beyond business trips and occasional weekends away. "Where were you thinking?" "Italy. Spend a month looking at art and eating food and remembering what it feels like to have absolutely nothing to do except exist." "A month?" "The museum will survive without you for a month. I've checked." He smiled. "Roman said he'll personally make sure nothing burns down, literally or figuratively." "Roman hates running things." "Roman tolerates running things for short periods when it means we're happy." His words, not mine. Elise thought about it. A month in Italy with Damien, no emergencies, no threats, just the two of them being people who loved art and each other. "Okay." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Let's go to Italy." They left in September when the museum was between exhibitions, flew into Rome and made their way north without a strict itinerary, just a list of museums and restaurants and small towns that looked interesting. They ate pasta in Florence and gelato in Siena and stood in front of paintings that had survived centuries just to make people feel something. One afternoon in Venice, sitting at a cafe, watching gondolas drift past, Damien said something that made Elise's heart stop. "I want to have a baby." She set down her coffee very carefully. "You want to have a baby. Or adopt. I'm not picky about methodology. I just..." He looked almost embarrassed. "I want to build a family with you. Something that's ours. Something that has nothing to do with contracts or circumstances. Just choice." Elise had thought about this, of course, but they'd been so busy building everything else that the conversation had never felt urgent. Now, looking at Damien's hopeful, vulnerable expression, it felt like the most urgent thing in the world. "I want that too," she said. His relief was visible. "Yeah?" "Yeah. I want a family, with you. Something messy and real and nothing like the family I came from." "God, I hope nothing like the family you came from." She laughed, and they spent the rest of the afternoon planning it out. Not the logistics, those would come later, but the kind of family they wanted to be. Patient, honest, present. The opposite of what they'd both grown up with. They came home from Italy refreshed and determined. Started the process of trying, then reconsidered and decided adoption might be better. There were kids who needed families, and they had space and love to give. The paperwork was extensive and invasive and occasionally infuriating, but they worked through it together, just like everything else. 18 months later, they brought home a 4-year-old girl named Sophie, who'd been in the foster system since she was 2. She was quiet and cautious, with dark curls and eyes that were too old for her face. She reminded Elise of herself, a child who'd learned to take up less space to survive. "Hi, Sophie," Elise said gently, crouching down to her level in their living room. "Welcome home." Sophie looked around the apartment with wide eyes, taking in the bookshelves and windows and space. "This is where I'm staying?" "This is where you live now," Damien corrected gently. For as long as you want. What if I'm bad? The question broke Elise's heart. Then we'll figure it out together. But Sophie, you living here isn't conditional on being perfect. It's just here. You belong here because we chose you and you're ours now. Sophie processed this with the kind of careful consideration that suggested she'd been disappointed before. Okay. It wasn't instant bonding or fairy tale transformation. Sophie had nightmares. She hoarded food in her bedroom. She tested boundaries constantly, waiting for them to send her back. But Elise and Damien were patient, consistent, present. They showed up every day and proved that chosen family could be just as real as blood. 6 months in, Sophie called Elise mom for the first time. Elise cried for an hour. A year in, Sophie told Damien she loved him without prompting. He had to leave the room because he couldn't let her see him fall apart. They were a family, messy and imperfect and absolutely real. The museum continued to thrive. Sophie started kindergarten and made friends who came over for play dates that filled the apartment with noise and chaos. Elise published a paper on contemporary museum practice that got cited enough to make her feel legitimate. Damien started a foundation that helped former foster kids access education and housing. They built lives that mattered. 7 years after that first terrible family dinner, Elise stood in the museum after hours, Sophie asleep in Damien's office while he finished paperwork. She walked through the galleries alone, looking at art she'd chosen, in a building she'd helped bring back to life, part of a family she'd built from nothing. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother, the first in 7 years. I saw the article about your museum in the Times. Congratulations. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Just a brief recognition that Elise had become someone worth noticing. She almost deleted it. Almost ignored it like she'd ignored every other attempt at contact over the years. Instead, she typed back, "Thank you." Then she put her phone away and went back to her family. Later that night, tucked into bed with Damien, Sophie asleep down the hall in a room painted with stars, Elise thought about the girl she'd been. The one who'd hidden behind marble columns and made herself small and believed that invisibility was safety. That girl was gone. Not erased, never erased, but transformed into someone stronger. Someone who'd walked into gunfire and built museums and chose love even when it terrified her. "What are you thinking about?" Damien asked, pulling her closer. "How far we've come." "Pretty far." "Are you happy?" "Disgustingly happy." He kissed her temple. "You?" "Yeah." She smiled in the darkness. "I am." And she was. Not perfectly. Perfection was impossible and boring. But really, genuinely, messily happy. The kind of happy that came from building something with your own hands, from choosing people who chose you back, from being seen exactly as you were and loved anyway. The shy girl who nobody noticed had become a woman nobody could ignore. Not because she was loud or perfect or anything other than herself, but because she'd stopped apologizing for existing. She'd stopped hiding. She'd stepped into the light and claimed the space she deserved. And in doing so, she'd found everything she'd been too scared to want. A home that felt like safety. A partner who felt like possibility. A child who felt like hope. A life that felt like hers. That was the real transformation. Not from invisible to seen, but from surviving to living. From scared to brave. From alone to loved. And every single terrifying, beautiful moment of it had been worth it. Outside their bedroom window, the city hummed with life. Millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, people finding each other and losing each other and building lives from whatever pieces they had. Elise and Damien were just two of those stories. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary. Except to each other, they were everything. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The girl who'd been invisible had become unforgettable. Not to the world necessarily, but to the people who counted. To the man who'd asked her to take a chance. To the daughter who called her mom. To herself. She'd been seen, she'd been chosen, she'd been loved, and she'd loved back with everything she had. That was the story. Not of a perfect life or a flawless love, but of two broken people who'd found each other in the chaos and decided to be whole together. Who'd taken a business arrangement and alchemized it into something that felt like magic. Who'd survived the worst and built the best from what remained. Who'd learned, finally, that being seen was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely worth the risk. And as Elise drifted off to sleep in Damien's arms, safe and loved and home, she thought about the woman she'd become, the one who'd said yes when she was terrified, the one who'd walked into danger for love, the one who'd built museums and raised daughters and learned, finally, to take up space without apology. That woman was her, and she was never going to hide again.